Hey everybody, welcome back to another very exciting Adobe Live. I am your host, Jesus Ramirez. How's it going today? I see a lot of familiar faces in the chat. Carol, General Kenobi, Patrick, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for helping out in the chat. Cody Bear, good to see you. I hope everybody's having a wonderful day. It's a very cold and cloudy day here in the San Francisco Bay Area, at least in the South Bay where I am. Let me know in the chat where you're watching from. I always love reading where people are tuning in from. Today we're going to talk all about color grading in Photoshop. So we're going to dive deep into what color grading is, how it works, and how you can apply it to your images. So as usual, I have a ton of stuff to get into. So I don't want to spend too much time talking here in the introduction, but I do want to mention that if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to head over into behance.net/live so that I can see your comments. And make sure that if you have any comments or questions, just leave them in the chat. I'll be glancing over to make sure that I can answer them. And I think Cody Bear will be in the chat also answering questions if you have them. We have Tim from Northern Michigan. I would presume that it's a little colder there than it is here. I'm not sure. Let me know. But I'm going to switch over into my screen now, and we're going to talk about color grading. So what is color grading? Color grading is simply applying a creative color correction to an image to give it a look and feel that helps you tell the story that you want to tell with your photo. There is no right or wrong. It's all subjective. All I'm going to do in this stream is show you techniques that'll help you try to get your ideas that are in your head into the image inside of Photoshop. So we're going to talk about different tools and techniques that can help you apply creative color correction to your photos. Now, before we get to that, we do need to talk about the difference between creative color correction and color correction. And color correction is actually very important before you start applying the creative color correction process. So let's take a look at that. What is color grading? Well, generally speaking, you want to have a neutral image when you start applying a creative color correction. In other words, you don't want to have a color cast already in the scene or in the photo, just because it might make things more complicated later down the line. So it's usually a good idea to start with a neutral image. What does that mean? It could be simply explained by saying that you need an image that has neutral grays. You'll notice that I have 3 gradients here, going from black to white. And when I hover over them in the info panel here, you'll notice the RGB values. Notice that in this center one, the RGB values are all the same. So this means that this is a neutral gray. There's no channel that has a lot more color than the other. It's okay if the channels are not 100% perfectly in sync. It's okay to have a few values off, but when you start getting larger shifts or larger differences in the channels, you'll start getting a color cast. Notice how in this case, the blue channel is much lower than the others, so we get a little bit of a yellow color cast. In this gradient here on the right, the blue channel is much larger than the other two, so we get a blue color cast. Now, this is not necessarily good or bad. As I mentioned earlier, all this is subjective, but generally speaking, when you're creating a creative color grade, you want to make sure that your grays are neutral so then you can apply a color grade on top of that. And I have several examples here. I have this, we'll go with, let me see, we'll go with that one. I have a couple examples I want to show you, so I want to know which one I'm going to go with first. So we'll go with this one first. And just to show you how this is just one way of color correcting your images or white balancing your images. There's a lot of ways of doing it. One of the ways that I prefer is by creating a curves adjustment layer. And in this curves adjustment layer, we can control the brightness of the image, and then we can control the brightness of each individual channel through this dropdown. And obviously you can do this by hand. This is the way we used to do it way back in the day before we had fancy tools. I'll show you the old school way. The old school way was to go into the red channel, and with the histogram enabled, you could see the information in that channel, but notice how there is no information from here all the way to the left. And I'll expand this to make it more, make it easier to see. So you can see that there's no information from the black point all the way to this point, about 93 or 89 or so. So the way we used to do it is by just simply dragging the black point to where the information starts, and then doing that with the white point, like so. And then you would do that with every single channel. So we're finding the black and we're finding the white points and then dragging them to where we find the information in the histogram. And that, in a lot of cases, would neutralize the image and we no longer would have an ugly color cast. Now, we don't usually need to do that anymore. There's a lot of faster ways of doing that same thing now. And you can actually do it automatically with one click now inside of Photoshop. If you click on auto, you'll notice that Photoshop will make an auto color correction adjustment, but unfortunately, it's not a very good one. And in my opinion, the algorithm that Photoshop uses for this auto color correction is not the best one. There's different algorithms that you can choose from, and I like to change the default algorithm so that it applies a different one, not the one that comes enabled by default. So how do you change the algorithm? You can hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and click on Auto. This will bring up this window here. Notice now that we have a list of algorithms right here. There's 4 of them. By default, you'll have Enhance, Brightness, and Contrast. And you can click on the others to see what they do. And Enhance per channel contrast is a good job, but I prefer Find Dark and Light Colors. And that is doing exactly what we just manually did. And it's doing it better than, you probably could do it by hand, to be quite frank with you. But that's essentially what it's doing. Then I like to check Snap Neutral Midtones to try to neutralize it even better. And then I check Save as Defaults to save this algorithm by default. In other words, whenever you create a new hue and saturation adjustment layer, a new curves adjustment layer, you can click on auto and it applies that adjustment automatically. So I would recommend changing that algorithm just because, again, in my opinion, it tends to work better in most cases. And then once you have an image that looks like this, it's much easier to apply a creative color correction rather than starting with something that looks like that. So when you apply a color grade or a creative color correction, it's always a good idea to neutralize the image first, just because it makes it easier to work with. Now let's look at this image. And I'll create a curves adjustment layer and click on auto. And it doesn't always work, unfortunately. If you apply the adjustment and it doesn't work, what you need to do at that point is click on this icon, this center eyedropper, and click anywhere on the image that should be a neutral gray, like the brick paths here on the ground. And it works great, as you can see. Now, you might be wondering, well, why do I need to do all that? Why can't I just simply click on this icon and click on the gray break path? You can definitely do that, but you'll notice that now you have to add contrast to the image to make it neutral. So I would just start with the auto button and you might get lucky. And if not, simply click on the gray point eyedropper and find something that should be a neutral gray, maybe the strap on her backpack, or as I said before, the break path, and it'll make that adjustment. So that is the workflow that I would recommend. As I said, there's a lot of other ways of neutralizing an image. This is just one of the easiest and fastest. There's obviously things you can do with other tools, including the camera raw filter. So, this is just one of many things you can do. And now that you have your image neutralized, what you actually, I just want to make sure I have the time up, because as you guys know, I can start talking and teaching, and next thing you know, I'll be cutting into the next person's time. So I don't want to do that. So I had to bring up the time because I realized I hadn't put up the time up on my screen. So I just wanted to bring that up. So now that we've color corrected the image, I have one more example here. It's just ugly taco truck. And if you create a curves adjustment layer, clip it to the layer below, click on auto, it automatically neutralizes it because we have that algorithm. Now we're ready to apply a creative color correction. So what is a creative color correction? Well, it's simply, as I mentioned earlier, a color adjustment you apply to an image to tell a story. The term color grading really comes from the film industry, and it just means that, applying color to a film to help you tell your story better. And I have some screenshots here of some movies that you might recognize. These are just movies that I've enjoyed and that I've enjoyed the way that the creative team applied color to the movie. And I just want to show you these examples to give you some ideas and also to start to get you to start paying attention to the movies that you see, because you might actually see color combinations that you really enjoy. So I'll start with the movie Limitless from 2011. And this movie actually has two color grade variations. So this dull, desaturated look and this brighter look, and it's warm. And the reason that they did this for this particular movie is that if you've seen the movie, no, spoiler alert, the main character decides to take a pill that makes him a lot smarter for a period of time. While he's under the influence of that genius pill, he sees the world in a much brighter way. So the color grading of the film changes. So it's a way of helping tell the story that right now he is in that state of brightness, and he just looks more put together. Everything about the color in this screenshot is telling us that he's just in a brighter state, as where he's not on that genius pill, he's just dull and boring. So they're using color to help tell that story. We have Terminator Salvation here from 2009. And again, a very dull, gray, almost monochrome look, desaturated. And compared to, I think I have another Terminator one in here, Terminator Genesis from 2015. And this is the complementary color cast of blues, teals, and oranges. And that is a popular color combination in film because those colors are opposite in the color wheel. You'll see the color wheels here, and you can see that we have blues, teals here on this side, and oranges and reds on this side. And this is usually where skin tones tend to be. So when you use complementary colors side by side, they tend to pop. So obviously with actors, they have skin tone. And unless it's some crazy alien movie, they like to put blue behind or teal behind actors to make them pop. And in terms of the storytelling, Terminator Salvation takes place entirely after the apocalypse, the end of the world. So it's a much grimmer, dim world. Whereas Terminator Genesis, for the most part, it takes place in current times. So it's not the end of the world. So the color grading helps to tell that story. Emily from 2001 uses color combinations of red and greens. If you've seen that movie, you'll notice that there's a lot of red and green all over that movie. Even her skin tones are pushed a little bit to the yellows to help with this color combination. So red and green is really big in that movie. Again, it helps tell that particular story. The Matrix from 1999 uses a lot of green. Notice how much green there is, even in the shadows and the skin tones. That is to create, to help further drive the point home that they are in a computer simulation. Is very, it almost gives it like a silicone effect, like just not real. And that, again, that color combination is used to drive that story further home. And I have a bunch of examples, but I think you get the idea. And the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from 2014, they use the same teal-orange combination, blue-orange combination, but not necessarily with people. Here we have the New York City skyline and the sky, again, creating that combination that we see with the color wheel. Blues on one side, oranges and yellows on the other. So it's something that you need to think about. You don't necessarily need to follow a color wheel if you don't want to, but as long as the color that you apply to an image is helping to tell the story, I think you've done a good job. By the way, let me know in the chat what movies you enjoy that have good color combinations. I was actually just thinking about a movie, and I can't remember the name. I think it's called Running Scared with Paul Walker. Not a really popular movie. I think it's from the early 2000s, but the color grading in that movie, in my opinion, is excellent. But yeah, let me know in the chat if you can think of any movies that have really cool colors and maybe something that we should look at. And that's right, Reverb Mike, they made a TV show with Limitless. I think it only had one season. It's not bad. Color grading. So this is what we're gonna work with today. We're gonna work with this image, and we're going to apply creative color grades to this photo using different tools so that you can see all the different tools that are available to you inside of Photoshop. So one of the most popular tools in Photoshop to adjust colors is the curves adjustment layer. And the curves adjustment layer is can be very difficult to understand if you're just learning it, but all you really have to remember at the end of the day is a couple things. Number one is when you drag up, you add light. When you drag down, you subtract light. That's like the number one principle. So what does that mean? Well, I can click here, drag up, I add light, drag down, subtract light. Also, you'll notice that there's a line right there. You see that line right here is a little faint gray line. That line right there is right in the center. When it's there, when it's right in the middle, this is like your default. You haven't made any adjustments. So as soon as you go above that line, you're adding light, and as soon as you go below that line, you're subtracting light. And it works a lot like a dimmer switch, like you might have at home. You know, when you drag the light up, the room gets brighter. You drag it down, it gets darker. Same idea. On the left-hand side, we have the black point. So we drag the black point to the left. Notice now how if we drag the black point on the left up, notice now how the image no longer has any black pixels. The brightest pixel is now this shade of gray. So that's what we're telling Photoshop. Make the darkest pixel this shade of gray here. And that's why the image looks brighter. Remember, we're dragging up, we're adding light. And if we take the white point and drag down, now we're subtracting light. Now we're telling Photoshop, make the brightest pixel this shade of gray here. See that? So basically, this gradient tells us what the original color is, and this one tells us what it becomes. So x-axis, what it is, y-axis, what it becomes. So originally it was white, and now it becomes this shade of gray. And in essence, that's how the tool works. You add and subtract light. You can also subtract light or add light in the individual channels. When you're in a channel, when you drag up, you add light in the color of the channel that you're on. And when you drag down, you subtract light in the opposite color. So in the case of the red channel, when you drag up, you get red light. When you drag down, you get cyan. In the green channel, when you drag up, you get green. When you subtract light, you get magenta. And in the blue channel, when you drag up, you get blue, of course. And when you subtract light, you get yellow. And I think I had a graphic here that better illustrated that. Let me see if I can find it here. Oh, I think I might have closed that particular file. Let me open it up because I think it'll be beneficial for you guys to see. And sorry about that. I should have had that file open. Here we go. This is just a screenshot illustrating what I just described. So you can see that with the red channel, the top part gives you red, the bottom part gives you cyan, the top part in the green channel gives you green, the bottom part gives you magenta. With the blue channel, blue gives you, dragging up gives you blue, and dragging down gives you yellow. Like if you can remember that, then you'll pretty much be able to master the curves adjustment layer, because it's as simple as that. Dragging up and down gives you those colors. So now that we know that, how does this help with, and I'll close this window not to have so many windows open. So now that we know that, how can we apply a color grade to this image? Well, it really depends on the color grade that we're going for, right? If we look at this image, we have almost like a spy, secret agent kind of person. So maybe it's more like a summer blockbuster rather than a rom-com. So in this case, we might want to go with those blues and teals and orange color combination. Well, to do that, we can start by using the curves adjustment layer. We can go into the blue channel and maybe drag the blues up and see what happens. And maybe we want to drag the blues up more in the shadows. The shadows are here at the bottom, but not so much on the highlights. And then we can go into the red channel and we can subtract red from the shadows and highlights, but not so much in the highlights. And I meant to say subtract reds in the shadows, but not so much in the highlights is really what I meant to say. But as you can see, we're already applying that color to that image, and it's already giving us that effect that we're going for. And then we can go into the RGB channel here, composite, and we can add a little bit of contrast just to create more of that effect. See that? Not difficult at all. And obviously, you have to think about the colors that are in the image. One of the reasons that I chose this photo for the stream today is that there's a lot of neutral grays, so it's easy to apply a color grade like this. This would be much more difficult if maybe he were standing in a forest and everything behind them is green. We would have to use a different technique, but the principles remain the same. Somebody in the chat wrote, the future of color grading is, and that was Frank, by the way, the future of color grading is prompt and AI, asking color grade my image as in Terminator movie. Yeah, probably not right. I'm probably not incorrect, is what I meant to say. But yeah, so this is the one of the things that you can do. Another thing that you can do that I think is very beneficial is take advantage of other tools inside of the layers panel. For example, the selective color adjustment layer. This is a very powerful tool that allows you to select the color and then subtract or add color to that. And the way that this works is very easy. You can go into the neutrals here and add a little bit of cyan, subtract yellow, and make adjustments with the magenta if need be. Then you can use the black to make those colors darker or brighter. Now, when you do that, you'll notice that we have obviously affected the skin tones. We did that earlier with the curves adjustment layer. In that situation, you probably would create another curves adjustment layer, use a layer mask, and then target the skin tones. But in this case, we can probably target the skin tones using one of the other colors. So the skin tones, no matter your ethnicity, are usually found in the reds and yellows. So you can go into the reds and then subtract cyan and add a little bit of yellow. And then maybe adjust the blacks and see if that makes any adjustment or any changes. And maybe add a little bit of maybe magenta. And then I can go into the yellows and do the same thing. Subtract cyan from the yellows to give it more red. And I'll make extreme adjustments here so you can see. And I'm affecting the background, but that's okay. And I'll increase the yellows as well. And notice that I am indeed affecting his face. And all I'm looking for is something that looks like a neutral color, or I'm sorry, a realistic skin tone on his face. So you can see how we were able to make that adjustment, again, just by using these sliders. In this case, we don't have a lot of other colors to worry about. Again, one of the reasons why I chose this image is because it was going to be easy to explain how the tools work, since there are not so many colors in the image. There is a bit of green here, but again, we don't need to worry about it. If you really wanted to target that green, maybe you can choose the greens here and then adjust it. You can see how the signs are adjusted as I drag the black point here, or the black slider with the greens. I don't think there's any need to do that. I see in the chat that we have comments on LUTs, 3D LUTs. That's right. So just to explain what that is, since I already brought it up, when you are working in Photoshop, you have access to the color lookup table adjustment layer, 3D LUTs, here they are. And these LUTs allow you to apply a color grade to your photos. I'm just tapping on the down pointing arrow, and they actually do have a teal and orange LUT that I don't really like too much, to be frank with you, but they have one. And I'll find it and I will show it to you. Let me see. Why is this thing stuck? Oh, here we go. It is right here, teal orange plus contrast. There it is, teal orange plus contrast. Not a big fan of it, but there it is. If you want, you can bring the opacity down as well, and then you get a little bit of that effect. So color lookup tables are your friends. I would recommend using them. And actually, something that you can do with creative here, this is something that, as usual, something that I was not planning on teaching you guys, but since you brought it up, we can do something fun. So what I'll do first is just keep this adjustment layer here. We'll pretend that this is like the perfect color grade and we want to use it for everything. And I'll create another adjustment layer and I'll just bring them to saturation because maybe I like it, but it's too saturated. And I'll add one more adjustment layer just for the purposes of demonstrating how this works. Maybe I just want a little bit more contrast, right? There we go. We'll say that this is good. So something that you can do in Photoshop is take your color grades that are created by using multiple adjustment layers and save them as LUT files. And then you can apply that LUT file to your Premiere Pro projects. So what you can do to save this is put them all into a group. You don't have to, but I like putting them all into a group, and I just call it color grade. And then on this layer, I'm going to show you something that's not going to work, and you'll see why. So then what you need to do is go into File, Export, and choose Color Lookup Tables. And Photoshop's going to say, no, you can't do that because you do not have a background. And I'm like, what's going on, bro? I do have a background. No, actually, I don't. What you need to do is click on the background layer on your bottommost layer, then go into Layer, New, Background from Layer, and now it is a background. So then you can go into File, Export, Color Lookup Tables, and you can add a description if you want. The format that you probably are going to want to use is Cube, just because Photoshop supports it, Premiere supports it, and many other video editing applications support it. So I would just stick with Cube. You can adjust the grid quality if you like. The higher the quality, the larger the file size. High is more than good for this case. So I can just press OK, and it's asking me where to save. So I will save in this document, and I'll copy the file location just so I don't have to come back into it. Cinematic color grading LUT. That sounds good. I'll save it, and now my LUT is saved. So what does that mean? Well, now I can create a color lookup adjustment layer and go into Load LUT here, and then find it. And let me just go to that folder, and here it is, Cinematic Color Grading LUT. Click on Load, and now Photoshop will apply exactly that same look to my image, but now using one adjustment layer. And the advantage of doing that is that you can take this adjustment layer and just apply it to any image that you have. And you can also apply it to any video that you have. So from Adobe Premiere, you can definitely apply this to a video. And I don't have a video file ready to play for you in Adobe Premiere, but you can definitely do that. Another thing that you can do, and actually it's in my YouTube channel. So on my YouTube channel, one of my recent videos is on how to take a LUT file from Photoshop and apply it to your Zoom calls. So actually, the video that you're looking at now has a LUT file applied to it that I made in Photoshop, so that like my skin looks better and the blues in the background look better. The blue here in the microphone looks better. The original feed is not as good, and I don't know if I want to like mess around with that while the stream is going. But let's see. Let me disable it and see if it makes a difference. Yeah, you see the difference? See that's without the LUT I created in Photoshop, and this is with the LUT I created in Photoshop. So you can definitely use these techniques inside of Photoshop to export a LUT and then apply it to your stream calls. And the way that you do that is here. If you go to my YouTube channel, photoshoptrainingchannel.com is the website. It's the latest video. Actually, there's one that just came out yesterday that hasn't made it to the website, but it'll still be here. How to look better on Zoom using Photoshop. So I recommend that you check it out, and it will be basically what you just saw here, but the tutorial shows you how to get it onto Zoom and other video streaming applications. So there you go. Another thing that you can do is when you create a LUT that you really like, what I recommend people, or not, I won't call it a LUT, I'll call it a look. When you create a look that you really want, maybe you should create a library with that particular look. And I guess I'll just create a library to show you. You can call a library, and you can call it like my favorite looks or something. If I can spell my favorite looks. Click on create, there it is. And then you can drag that color grade onto that library. So now, unfortunately, it doesn't have a preview. It'll be super cool if you could add your own previews to your library assets. At the moment, you can't. But the point is now that that's in my Creative Cloud library, whenever I want to apply that to another image, I can just drag it in, but not just drag it in. Because if I just drag it in, you'll notice that nothing will happen. What you need to do is hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and drag it in. And when you do that, it drags in the folder with all those layers. So it really becomes a great way of saving all those color adjustments that you make in a non-destructive way, because you can always bring them back with these adjustment layers and make changes, right? So if you were to apply this to a different photo, it might not look the same, but you can just make the adjustments to make it work for the new photo. So it's something that I think you guys should try. Let me see if there's any questions in the chat. I need a lot to follow me around. Yeah, me too, Marcia. Okay, very good question, Llama Mama. Can LUTs include things besides adjustment layers like Gaussian blur? Unfortunately not. You can only include color adjustments. So basically anything in the adjustments layer panel here. And that also includes opacity, fill, blending modes, and blend diff. But you won't be able to, like create a LUT that blurs something. Cool. Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that. Saying that she saw the tutorial last week. And what was your question, Ray? It says that you had a question, but I don't see what the question was. Sorry if I missed it. Oh, I see. I already answered. Can you add the LUT file to the library? So the short answer is no, you can add it. I'm assuming you're asking, can I just drag this in there? You can drag it in there because it's a layer, but you can add, let me be super clear here. So you can add the color lookup adjustment layer to the library, but I'm assuming you're asking if you can add the file that was exported to the library, and that you cannot do. Okay, cool. All right. Let's see. I kind of lost track here because we started talking about LUTs, even though I wasn't thinking about talking about LUTs, but I think you guys enjoy that. Let me see. Another thing that you can do to apply color grades to a photo is use Camera Raw. And Camera Raw has a very powerful color correction, color grading tool. To apply a color grading Camera Raw, I recommend that you convert your layer into a smart object. For those of you that don't know, a smart object is a container that allows you to put one or more layers into it, and you can apply non-destructive adjustments, distortions, filters, and transformations. In other words, you can always come back and change your mind and make adjustments or completely remove the adjustment. So if you go into filter and choose Camera Raw filter, you have access to the powerful Camera Raw filter, which gives you total control over color and tonality of your photo. And the way that I like to use this is just by going down the list, right? So start from the top, basic. Don't want to make my image cooler, warmer. In this case, I'm not going to do any of that. Then adjust the contrast and all that fun stuff here. Again, I'm not going to do that just because I want to focus entirely on the color grading panel here. And this is a very powerful tool. It used to be called the duotone panel. Somebody remind me in the chat. They only used to have 2 of these circle things, but now they have 3. And the advantage is that you can now target midtones as opposed to just shadows and highlights. And you can also do a global adjustment. That means is that you can click on the shadows, for example, and now apply a color to the shadows. And how much saturation is there on that shadow of that color that I select, right? And you can click on this icon here to expand, and then you can just use the slider instead of clicking and dragging on the circle, whatever makes you feel more comfortable. And then the saturation, just how much of that color there is, nothing or a whole lot of that color, the color selected in the hue slider. And then luminance is how dark that color is. Really cool, right? So just with basically a couple sliders, you are able to control specifically the tones and then adjust the blending and the balance. Pretty cool. And you can spend all day fine-tuning these results, of course. And then you can go into the midtones, and this is going to look terrible, by the way, but I want you to see the power of this thing. Then you can go into the midtones, and I'll choose reds, right? So we have blues in the shadows, reds in the midtones, and then obviously you can adjust those settings as well. And then with this icon, you can adjust the highlights. We'll make them green again, just to make them super noticeable. And you can see now how we're applying green in the highlights, red in the midtones, and blue in the shadows, which is incredible in terms of targeting those specific tones. And again, you have total control of those by using the blending and balance. But the cool thing, if it could get any cooler, is that you can click on this icon and now you can apply a global adjustment. So now I can apply, say, magenta to everything. So not only did I apply blue to the shadows, red to the midtones, and yellow or green to the highlights, I also applied magenta on top of all of that. So you can get some pretty crazy color grading with this particular panel. So I highly recommend that you come in and check it out. And that's just the color grading. We haven't even talked about all the other fun stuff you can do here. For example, you can go into the color mixer and then make adjustments to specific colors. For example, if I click on the yellows here, I can increase or decrease the brightness of anything that was originally yellow. And obviously, same thing with the skin tones and all of that stuff. So you have complete control of the color in this image. And again, there's no right or wrong. Experiment with whatever you think will work best for the story that you're trying to tell with your image. But also, more importantly, I would recommend going and just watching movies and taking screenshots, and then bring those screenshots over into Photoshop and try to match that color tone to the image that you're working with, so that you can learn how to apply specific color effects. Let me see if there is any other questions. Okay, question. Cody Vera is asking, question from YouTube. What happens if we do an S-curve in Curve's RGB channel? Okay. So I know what those words mean, but I'm not exactly sure what they're asking. So I'll explain what I think the question means. So an S-curve, what is an S-curve? An S-curve is simply a curve that looks like an S. See that? It looks like an S. And an S-curve is used to create contrast. And remember what we talked about earlier, when the point goes below the line, it subtracts light. When it goes above the line, it adds light. But if we do that in the form of an S-curve, meaning we subtract the light on the darker pixels and add light to the brighter pixels, because that's what we're doing here. Remember, these are the darker pixels here on this side, and now we're making them darker. And these are the brighter pixels up here because they're on this line. See that? And now we're making them brighter. Well, it's going to add more contrast, right? That's what contrast is, making darker pixels darker and brighter pixels brighter. So we're adding contrast. So I believe the question is, what happens when you go into one of these channels and add an S-curve? Well, the same thing happens. You make the darker pixels darker and the brighter pixels brighter. In the case of the red channel, you make the darker pixels have more green or teal, or cyan, really, that's really what I should have said, cyan, and you make the brighter pixels have more red. In the case of the green channel, you make the darker pixels have more magenta and the brighter pixels have more green. In the case of the blue channel, you make the darker pixels have more yellow and the brighter pixels have more blue. So that's what happens when you apply an S-curve to the RGB channels. And I believe that's what the question was, Cody Bear. So let me know if that was not the question and they have a clarification. Oh my God, Frank, what is my favorite technique for color grading? Whatever's fastest for what I'm trying to do. And what I mean by that is, if I'm working with this image and I know that I want to get that, blue, teal, orange effect, I probably will use selective color because I know I can get it super fast, just by dragging a couple sliders, and then just doing the opposite on the yellows and the reds like you saw before. That will probably be my method for getting this specific look on this image. But if I had another image, like completely different, like for example, oh God, let me see if I can find a photo. I know I have a nighttime photo of a city here that might work. Hopefully I can find it. It's one that I have in mind to show you specifically what's in my head. And of course I can't find it, but we'll use, let me see. All right, we'll use this one. It will probably work, but I think you'll get the idea. So if the idea is to get a desaturated look, but only have like the yellows really pop out, like the yellows and maybe reds, and everything else is desaturated, and that's the look that I want to go for. Well, in that case, I would convert the layer to a smart object, go into filter, camera, oops, clicked on the wrong option. Filter, camera, raw, filter, and under I wouldn't even use color grading. I would go into the color mixer, and from here, I would just basically desaturate everything. Oops, I went the wrong way on the green one. I will desaturate all of those guys, but the reds will have more saturation, and the oranges will have more saturation, and the yellows, and maybe the reds less because it creates this ugly thing here on the left. I'm not even sure what that is, but I'll probably, in that case, in this specific image, I guess I would just bring that down. But notice now how like the yellows are really standing out, and maybe that's the look that I'm going for. If I was going for something specific like this, this effect here, if it was something specific like this, then obviously I would use camera raw, because I know that it's going to give me the look that I'm going for easier and faster, rather than using, say, curves or selective colors. So it really depends on what the ultimate effect is, like the end goal. Like, what is my end goal? And then I can think, well, this tool might get me there faster, better, a combination of both. It really, really depends. Also, in some cases, and I mean, I know this is not really your question, but in some cases, it depends on how the file is built. So I work on TV and movie posters sometimes, and depending on how the file is built, one tool may not be the easiest way of doing it, but it might be the most efficient in keeping everything in order. So it just depends. I don't really have a favorite color grading tool, to be honest with you. What I was gonna say is I'm not a big fan of tools. I'm a big fan of results. So I guess that's how I should have answered that. Whatever gives me the result that I want. And cool. Let's see, any other questions? I see comments about the color wheel in the chat. So I guess I should mention this resource. If you go into color.adobe.com, you will see the color wheel. Yay. And then you can select the different color harmonies. For example, complementary, which is what we were just looking at. Remember, teals, blues, oranges, skin tones. Yep, that's all here. So you can come in here and use the color wheel to come up with. People keep ringing on my doorbell whenever I do streams now. That's so weird. Nobody ever comes. And then I was streaming yesterday. I had someone in the front door, and now I have someone else again. But anyway, the point is that these color wheels can help you come up with ideas of what colors to use. Something that I really didn't talk about much in this stream, and I do want to talk a bit about it. We have like 10 minutes. Is that we've been using tools that, add or subtract a color, but you could also do something like a solid color fill layer, for example, and then use it to apply a color. For example, we can use a blending mode, right? We can go into like the color mode, or we can go into multiply, and then maybe bring down the opacity a little bit, and then use layer masks, right? There's no right or way as long as you get the result. Remember, there's no right or wrong. What I'm going to do here is just delete that layer mask, go into this layer, and go into select, subject, and then hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and click on the layer mask icon. And now we have, this blue background, and we can manipulate this layer any way we want. For example, we can even do another solid color fill layer. We'll just do like a orange one. Control Alt G to clip it to the layer below. And again, sorry about that, guys. I don't know if you can hear that someone's at the door, but I'm clearly streaming, so they're gonna have to wait. And then here's a keyword trick for you. If you hold Alt Shift, click and drag down, it inverts that in half, and now you have this look here. See that? So I'm not saying this is the best look in the world. Obviously, we can adjust it, But the point is that you are not necessarily stuck with those other tools. You can use layer mask and solid colors and use blending modes and blend diff. If I really was going to work on this in an actual project, I would probably use blend diff, and I would just hide the adjustment, maybe like on the darker tones, and keep them on the highlights, and then do the opposite on this one here. Maybe something like that. I don't know. But the point is that you can completely change the look of your image with almost any tool. You're just not stuck with curves and camera raw or any of that. It's completely up to you. And the main reason I wanted to show you this is because if you're trying to create maybe that green red look that we saw on Emily, this might be something that you might need to do. You might need to come in here and adjust the colors so that they better fit the look that you're trying to go for. So maybe something like that. I don't know. The point is that you're not stuck with those other tools. You can also use simple tools like solid color fill layers to apply colors to your images. Oh, hello, Jan. Good to see you. Any other questions in the chat? If not, then we'll move on. Something else I wanted to mention to you guys is if you click on this icon here, it'll bring up the Discover panel. And from the Discover panel, when you're in the Discover panel homepage, there is something called hands-on tutorials. And if you scroll down, you'll see these called add photo effect tutorials. All these tutorials right here are, not all of them, I shouldn't say all, most of them are tutorials that I made, not all of them. So this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. So what is that? 5 of them? 5 of them are tutorials that I made, including this one on creating a colorful dual lighting effect in Photoshop. You can just click on Start Tutorial, and it'll bring up the file in Photoshop, and you can follow the coach marks to apply a color grade to the image. And I'll just save this right now, and I'll open it because I wanted to use that file for something. Another way of applying color grades to an image is by using gradient maps. So if you go into gradient, and you can follow that tutorial, by the way, but I'm not going to follow it. I'm just going to teach it to you now. Gradient maps allow you to apply a color to an image based on the luminance values of the photo below. So in this case, we're telling Photoshop, apply black to the blacks and apply white to the whites, and then everything in between will be a gray between black and white. So that's why we get a black and white image. But we can also tell Photoshop, okay, well, why don't you apply blue to the image like so? But I don't want it to affect the background. So what I'll do is I'll create a group, put that layer in there, and then select the background, go into select subject, and then I will add a layer mask. But the point is that this gradient map is now applying a color to the image, right? And you can select how dark or bright that color is. In this case, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this one darker, and this one will just be, never mind, I changed my mind. This one here, I'll make black. And this one here, I will make blue, like so. And I'll press OK. Then I can change the blending mode to something like maybe hard light to really make it seem like there's a blue light hitting his face, and I can reduce the fill until I'm happy with the result. So maybe something like that. So now I have to decide, do I want blue on this side or a different color on the other side? In this case, I kind of like how this blue is looking here, so we'll just stick with that. So what I'm going to do now is make this layer black, Control I to invert, and then just paint where I want that effect on his shirt and his face. See that? Just on this side. Pretty cool. And I painted with white on the layer mask, by the way. Then I can take that, press Control J to duplicate it, and then click on the layer mask and invert it to apply that color on the other side. But I don't want the same color. I can just come here, click on the gradient editor, double click on the blue, and now I'll change that to red. So now there's red on the other side. So this is one technique that you can use. If you don't want the red to be so strong, you can definitely bring down the fill and adjust it accordingly. And also, since we're working with a layer mask, you can paint with black to hide the effect in other areas. So maybe there's a blue light, normal light, red light on the other side. And if you want, you can also invert those. Select the layer mask, Control I to invert, select this one, Control I to invert, and now we have red on one side and blue on the other. Kind of like that better now that I'm looking at it. And then maybe I will adjust the fill on this one to try to get something that works. And this is all this was created by using gradient maps and blending modes. Let me see if there's any questions. Clarissa, how do you export a JPEG so that it looks like your screen, basically, is a question? You can just go into File, Export, Export As, and pretty much anything that you see here should be the same thing as your screen. Obviously, if you bring down the quality to like 1 or something, it's going to look very bad. But as long as you're, around 5 or so, you should be okay in terms of how everything looks. You talked about nearest neighbor in terms of the export settings. I wouldn't worry about that unless you were going from like pixel art or like enlarging something that has like straight edges and things like that. And there's different algorithms that you can use when you save or when you enlarge or scale, I should say. And then just look at Adobe's HelpX to see which algorithm will be better for the scale or for the save, depending on the type of artwork that you're saving and specific things like that. But for something like this, just a regular file export will be fine. Cool. Let me see. Any other questions? All right. Let me close this file. Something else I should mention is that, and I guess we can use this photo for that. I'll go back into Camera Raw. Filter, Adobe Camera Raw. Earlier, I mentioned that it's a good idea to neutralize your image, color balance your images if you're applying a creative color correction. Another thing that you might want to do if you're working with raw photos, this is not a raw photo, by the way, so excuse me for that. But when you're working with raw photos, you can apply color profiles. You can click on this icon and you can see the color profiles. And color profiles are different than presets. They basically, how can I say this super quick? Because I got 3 minutes and I don't want to confuse anybody. When you take a digital photo, there's something called a demosaicing process that basically generates your image. And, what is black or what is red? Like, what is a color, right? Like, there's so many ways of interpreting what a color is. So essentially, a profile helps you interpret what a color should look like, right? And there's all these different profiles that you can use in Photoshop. And, when you click on one of these profiles, it applies that color style to the photo. But the one thing you will notice is that it doesn't adjust any of the sliders. All the sliders remain at 0. So that's different than applying a preset, because when you apply a preset, let me just do the default one, because when you apply a preset, and let me see, I don't know what presets I have here. I'll just pick one. We'll just say that preset. I don't even know what that is. But when you apply it, you'll notice that the sliders do move. See how the sliders move when I apply that preset? So a preset is just a preset location of a slider, a presetted, pre-placed location of a slider, whereas a color profile just interprets how a color should look. So depending on what you're doing, specifically if you're working with raw files, you might consider going into the profile and applying a color profile to your images, because it might help you get a similar look and feel across multiple photos. But that's optional if you want to do that. I just thought I would mention it and show you that option is available to you. All right, everybody, it looks like it's 9:55 and I am out of time. I'm actually 20 seconds early, or, I got 20 seconds to spare, which I usually don't. So that's pretty good. Anyway, everybody, thank you so much for joining me here on Adobe Live. I will be back again tomorrow for another Photoshop Bootcamp. Thank you so much for joining me. It was great. I'll talk to you guys soon. Thank you. Bye.